of a commercial mailing that would be similar. There are also discounts associated with periodicals mails, about a 5% discount. So there are preferences granted by statute for that mail.
And either of you, what is the total kind of subsidy that's coming from the American people? And isn't there an appropriation that actually is there to cover that cost, or does that just go to the bottom line?
That's for the blind.
The only congressional appropriations that we receive associated with providing mail is for free mail for the blind and overseas voters.
Okay. About half of that loss in standard mail that we were talking about, standard flats, can be traced to the nonprofits.
Dollar-wise, what would that be on an
dollar-wise?
Yeah, and what would be that dollar
about
amount?
$300,000 or $300 million.
$300 million. Okay.
I was looking for the exact number here. The loss per piece on standard mail flats that are the commercial is 4.7 cents. It's 22.4 cents for the nonprofit mail. So it's taking a big hit, and even though they're a smaller percent of the volume, it comes out almost equal, 311 million or something like that, or approximately that. We did put that number in the
And when's the last time we did an analysis of what would happen if we got rid of the subsidy or adjusted the subsidy, or however you want to frame it, but when's the last time that's actually been reviewed? And I'm new to this, so I need some help being pointed in the right direction to where specifically that is, and when is the last time we actually revisited that particular portion of it?
We did an analysis for a report that was presented to the FTC. I believe it was in 2007 or 2008. The cumulative...
Whatever it is, could you provide that to us?
That for the record.
Would be... I know it's hard right off the top of your head, and it's impressive. It kind of scares me that you actually know that right off the top of your head. So
yeah. Basically, the cumulative value of the nonprofit mail subsidies and the periodicals together was about $1.5 billion.
Okay, and of that, the nonprofit was, okay.
I believe it was about half and half, but I don't remember the exact numbers.
I was talking about the flats. It was 311 million.
Okay. A significant enough number that I would, Mr. Chairman, urge that we revisit and think that through as well, because it is a huge, huge number. And there are many tax benefits that are offered for being a nonprofit, but for the American people to have to subsidize that, however you want to frame that, I think that's worthy of diving into and rediscussing at some point. It's a big number. So with that, I'll yield back. I know we've got another panel that's waiting, so thank you for the additional time. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I welcome his question. And I agree with the point that there are nonprofits and there are nonprofits. Maybe we should look and see the amount of benefit that is actually derived to the public for each and every one. Let me ask in closing, I know we talked about this exigent rate case that's coming up in 2011. Do we have a time frame on that, and when should we? I know you've got a delicate balance here because of the potential shock value or shock impact of that rating decision on a very fragile system here. So do you have at least a time frame in mind?
Yeah, we will be looking at changing prices through the exigent mechanism early in 2011. Under the statute, the Commission has 90 days to evaluate our request once that's filed, and we intend to leave an appropriate amount of time for our customers to actually implement that change. So we're looking at about 6 months lead time.
Okay.
And the Commission is committed to getting that in 90 days as required. So.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, I want to thank you both. I think you've suffered enough, Ms. Robinson, Mr. Waller. Thank you for your testimony and for helping the committee with its work. Have a good day.
Thank you.
And can we ask the second panel to take their seats? Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to our second panel. Before we move to questioning, as you know, the custom before this committee is to have all witnesses sworn who are about to offer testimony. May I please ask you all to rise and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give to this subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. Let the record show that each of the witnesses has responded in the affirmative. I will now offer a brief introduction of each of our panelists on this second panel. Mr. William Burris is President of the American Postal Workers Union. Mr. Burris is also a member of the Executive Committee of the Union Network International, a global federation of unions that represent postal and other service workers. Mr. Lawrence Buck is the President of SLS Consulting Incorporated. SLS is a Washington, D.C. consulting firm that specializes in postal economics and environmental analysis. Mr. Buck has participated in rate, classification, and complaint cases regarding
the 1970 Postal Reorganization Act and continuing with the new Postal Reform Act of 2006. Final responsibility for postal costing and prices was delegated to the Postal Service and to the Postal Regulatory Commission. There have been, and there always will continue to be, differences as to whether the PRC and the Postal Service are getting it exactly right. But generally, they are doing a very good job. Not in every single case, and not in every single detail. You certainly wouldn't expect perfection in a system this large and this complicated. But in general, they have done very well. Thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Dr. Riley, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
How about that? Thank you for letting me testify before you. I'm here because I care about the Postal Service as an institution. I care about the people and I care about the customers. And I don't like the way things are going. The Postal Service is dying from self-inflicted wounds because it has discounts that have gone crazy and they need to be scaled back. Vice President Robinson testified that the Postal Service would never do anything to harm its customers or any segment of its customers. And to that I say, well, stop with the Saturday delivery plan. Do not end Saturday delivery. Keep the thing going. And while I've got your attention, I'd like to make two more proposals to you. I think the law needs to be changed. The retiree health care provision in the 2006 Act needs to be changed to put the Postal Service on the same position as any other major company in this country, and ought to be structured like a mutual insurance company or a mutual savings and loan, so that people realize it needs to earn a profit to provide the capital for new products, for new buildings, for expanded service, for converting the fleet to hybrid vehicles instead of having the old-fashioned 1995 long-life vehicles still out there. I'm going to give you a little background. In 1994, in spring, I sat before this committee with Chairman Bill Clay, and I'm going to show you a graph as to what it was like. Then the worst ever year of the Postal Service happened in 1993, and I joined Marvin Runyon in August with 6 weeks to go in that year. In the spring of '94, I sat before Congressman Clay, and I walked up to him today and said, you know, I testified before your father back in 1994. And he was very polite.
The Honorable Mr. Clay is here today. I just want to acknowledge that.
And he let me go for a bit and then said, my father died in 1976. And I apologize to you for mistaking one for the other. I'm going to tell you one more story. Back here, a congressman named Steny Hoyer, who was rising in the House of Representatives, told Marvin Runyon he was full of beans when Marvin said, I've got the place turned around. He said, I'll eat crow if you can turn this place around. And I was at the ceremony where Congressman Hoyer came to the Postal Service and cut the first piece of cake in a giant crow cake. It was great. He made a wonderful speech. The Postal Service had 4 years of billion-dollar profits, and it did it because it focused on the individual as a recipient. We had a balanced scorecard strategy, focusing on the customer, the employee, and the finances of the Postal Service. We had an incentive system that backed it up. And Marvin Runyon, this chart goes only through the third quarter of 1998, because that's when Marvin Runyon stepped down as Postmaster General and when I stepped down as CFO. This is the chart I showed the Board of Governors at my last meeting as CFO. And at the time, the major mailers were saying, the Postal Service is earning too much money. Way too much money. Profits are excessive. And new management promised to solve that problem, and solve it they did. They managed to get almost non-stop billion-dollar losses, with the exception of 3 years, thanks to the work of a guy named Bill Taman, who was able to get the government to realize that they were overcharging the Postal Service for CSRS retiree costs. The Postal Service has excess discounts. Congressman Conley summed up my position exactly when he says that when you have a way to save money, you save it equally. You save it so the Postal Service gets some of the benefit and so the mailer gets some of the benefit. Vice President Robinson said, well, gee, we've got this percentage markup. And as I tell my MBA students, you can't spend percentage. You can only spend cash. And because focusing on the wrong things, and the Postal Service has, it has a strategy that focuses on the representatives of the major mailers as customers. It focuses on productivity, and frankly, productivity as applied has hurt service. If you cut one person up behind the window and have an hour line wait, that means your productivity goes up. But it sure doesn't mean the customers like you any better. And I, for one, used to be an avid postal customer, and I got cured from having bad problems with Postal Service in the last 2 years. The Postal Service needs to put the service back and focus back on the individual customer and not on just the discounts and who can justify the biggest share for their person. When we were having record profits for 4 years, we didn't have to have a price increase. And that benefited the major mailers. And I would argue that today the Postal Service has driven away its customers. I was showing one of the representatives earlier today in the room the annual report of the Postmaster General of 1872. The Postal Service has been crying the sky has been falling because of electronic version for 1882. Back in 1993, we had a report that said the Postal Service is losing huge market share every year to email. My kids got their first computer in 1983. But in 1872, the Postmaster General complained that with the recent advances in Mr. Cassini's fax machine, the Postal Service is going to be completely threatened with going out of business. 1872. Took 100 years for the fax to come in, and when it finally did, it was gone in 20. And I've used my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I would ask in summary, make them scale back the discounts, change the law to help on the retiree costs and the profits, and do not let them go to 5-day-a-week delivery.
Thank you, Dr. Riley. Mr. O'Brien, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jim O'Brien. I'm the Vice President of Distribution and Postal Affairs for Time Incorporated, the largest magazine publisher in the United States. I'm testifying today on behalf of Time Inc. and the Magazine Publishers of America, the industry trade association for consumer magazines. About 90% of printed magazines in this country are delivered to their readers via the Postal Service. Time Inc. and the MPA care greatly about the Postal Service, its financial situation, its future viability, and its effectiveness in controlling the costs of periodicals class. We've been longtime partners with the Postal Service in examining postal and mailer operations to improve efficiency, streamline mail processing, and reduce costs. In 1998, I participated in a joint USPS periodicals mailers task force. We visited 17 postal facilities at all hours of the day and night to see every step in the processing of periodicals mail. Following our 1998 joint task force, the Postal Service issued a strategic improvement guide for flat processing. A main focus of the guide was to reduce the manual processing of periodical mail. To do our part, Time Inc. and MPA members have made significant investments in an ongoing effort to identify and implement ways to minimize the work required for the Postal Service to process and deliver our magazines. I brought with me today a carrier route bundle of Time magazine. Bundles like this are trucked by Time Inc. from our printing plants to USPS facilities that are located very close to the subscriber's zip code. This bundle remains intact throughout the process until it is opened by the letter carrier. This is the most efficient product that we can deliver to the Postal Service. The Postal Service and the Postal Regulatory Commission agree that preparing mail in carrier route bundles saves the Postal Service money. In 1989, 29% of periodicals mail was sorted to the carrier route. In 2009, carrier route sorted mail grew to more than 55%. However, despite the industry's successful efforts to improve efficiency and reduce costs for the Postal Service, periodicals costs, as measured by the Commission, continue to outpace inflation. Why hasn't the Postal Service been able to take advantage of the industry's cost-cutting efforts and its own investments in equipment to improve automation? I've learned from many years of analyzing postal operations and cost that a key problem facing the Postal Service and a major reason for the continuing increase in periodicals cost is excess capacity. In my experience, excess capacity often leads to manual processing despite the availability of automation. And manual processing leads to increased costs. The Strategic Improvement Guide for Flats Processing was crystal clear on this point. The report states, quote, "The inability to capture and process barcoded flats through automation results in a significant cost differential. In FY97, we failed to automate over 6 billion barcoded flats," end quote. Mr. Chairman, I visited a postal facility just 3 weeks ago and observed an operation that the USPS refers to as a bullpen, which is an entirely manual operation. Saw that 3 weeks ago. After spending billions of dollars on automation, the USPS continues today to manually process periodicals mail. This manual processing isn't requested or desired by periodicals mailers. It is a result of choices made within the Postal Service. Yet the Postal Service attributes these costs to the periodicals class. In analyzing costs, the Postal Service assumes that all costs are incurred efficiently and that all worker time and other resources spent on processing a particular class of mail are needed by and of benefit to that mail. Charging periodicals for the extra costs of manual processing that periodicals publishers did not request and do not need is unjust and unreasonable. The bottom line is, while the magazine industry has provided the USPS with more cost-effective mail, periodicals unit costs, as measured by the Commission, have risen since 1986 by more than 300%, 107% above inflation. Between FY 2006, the year in which the PAEA was enacted, and FY 2009, the CPI increased by 9.8%. Periodicals unit costs, as reported by the Postal Service, increased by 24%. Something is clearly wrong with the cost attribution process and the manual processing of periodicals mail. Periodicals mailers should not be asked to shoulder the burden of costs they did not cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Davison, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lynch. Thank you for your invitation to testify today. I represent the American Catalog Mailers Association. Half of America buys from catalogs, and for those who do buy from catalogs, when it arrives, its arrival is something that's exciting and helps keep mail interesting and relevant to all to the recipient. Catalogs also provide significant social benefit, delivering goods and services to the infirm, handicapped, elderly, and rural Americans, none of which can access stores easily. Catalogs are also eco-friendly. They may be America's biggest carpool. They save countless hours of driving and fuel and congestion on the road, and are particularly helpful to single-parent, time-starved single-parent families as well as dual-income households. In 2006, Congress modified the rate-making cost, but the cost accounting approach has not been modernized. The one that is in use today is a result of 36 years of intense litigation, and as far as I'm aware, has no parallel in any gap regulation or private industry standard cost system that is in widespread use. And time doesn't permit me to delve deeply here, but I would say that the setting of prices and allocation of costs is an extremely complicated area that is properly placed with USPS management with the review and concurrence of its regulator. The USPS is a high fixed cost system that is operating below its available capacity, and as more volume leaves the system, the remaining fixed cost base has to be spread over fewer and fewer pieces. Using a non-standard justification to push prices up just further perpetuates that downward spiral. In fact, the standard flats mail category was covering its costs until 2007, when there was an enormous increase in postage costs that drove a lot of catalogs to reduce their circulation. and further increases in this environment would be counterproductive and serve only to divert more catalogs out of the mail, put more companies at risk, and undermine the entire system. I think there's some useful concepts in private industry. For almost every company, there's products that are, profitability of those products vary, and yet customers buy across many different product categories. Companies regularly look at the sales and into each customer segment and try to understand the segment's profitability. Applying this to catalogs, we mail in standard mail flats, but we also mail an almost equal proportion in carrier route, which generates a net contribution to the USPS. We also, however, originate mail in standard mail letters, standard mail postcards. We send profitable first-class mail, and we also spend almost as much on parcel shipments as we do on sending catalogs, of which the USPS has a relatively small market share there, and that provides an additional growth opportunity. I think the key to the future survival of the Postal Service is to understand their total customer segment contribution. As illustrated above, taking decisions on a single product category can lead to changes in volume in other categories from that same customer segment. The goal must be increasing the total contribution from each market segment by optimizing the price and volume relationship. The greatest segment contribution is not always achieved by the highest price per piece. Sometimes a lower price, which generates a maximum volume, is one that is more profitable and sustainable. This is especially true in a volume-sensitive system with excess capacity. A customer-segmented approach also allows the USPS to manage the content of the mail stream, the amount of highly valued mail from the recipient's point of view. With all the communications alternatives available today, it is critical to keep Americans engaged and interested in the mail. Managing the content does just that. Perhaps ironically, just when the USPS is automating the flats mail stream, there are developments that threaten the amount of flats being processed. The USPS expects to dramatically reduce its cost to process flats with this equipment. But this will only occur if we do not drive flats out of the system before the automation comes online. So to summarize, a unique postal accounting system developed through years of litigation may not accurately reflect postal costs and certainly does not capture the market behavior of customer groups. The infrastructure of the USPS is hard to reduce, and the system needs to retain and grow volume. The catalog industry, which has a significant demographic tailwind behind it, is a great segment for the USPS managers to be focusing on for long-term growth. As catalog postage goes up, catalog volumes are going down. Since 1997, inflation has risen 37%, but catalog postage has gone up 58%, fundamentally altering the economics of cataloging, both reducing mail volumes and industry employment. In fact, the entire
different spots in the country at different times. And I was willing to pay $15 a week for snowbird mail for them to put it all in a priority mailbox and send it to me. But they'd only go to one address, and I could only choose one at a time, and I had to specify the dates in advance. In a world where I can go online to every one of my credit cards and change my bill once a month with a password-protected device, I can't get my mail sent to where I'm at. So my solution was to pay my bills online. The Postal Service, if everybody in this country knew about snowbird mail, and there are 38 million retired people in this country, 38 million people over 65, and if that just 5 million of them were to use 10 weeks of snowbird mail, that would add $750 million in revenue, and the cost would stay the same because the Postal Service is already forwarding most of that mail piece by piece anyway. It's more efficient to put it in a box and send it out. So there are a lot of good things the Postal Service could do to change the business model to take into account what's going on in this era. My daughter, who's been paying her bills online forever, is worried about identity theft and thinking about moving back. Does anybody ever advertise